Hello, today I'm reviewing the PA. This mousepad is Vaxee's version of the classic GSR SE, and overall it is a super solid control pad that I've really enjoyed using. I think that this pad could be a great option for anybody who's looking for a controlled cloth surface. To start off with the general build quality, this pad doesn't do anything special, but it still feels pretty premium nonetheless. As you can see here, the edges are completely unstitched. This does serve to make the pad very comfortable because you can't feel any sort of height difference. It feels very nice when rubbing your arm across it, and I don't think you should have any sensitivity issues at all. The only real concern I have comfort-wise is if you come from a downward angle and move your arm vertically, you may end up catching it at the very edge of the pad. It does create a pretty aggressive right angle that you can feel in this configuration. But if you are someone that likes to rest your arm a little bit higher, I don't think you should have any issues whatsoever. This pad is very comfortable to use. However, unstitched edges do bring some durability concerns because the top surface can actually separate from the underneath layers. I personally haven't experienced this yet, and after 2 weeks of use, my pad is still in good condition. There is pretty noticeable wear right here where I rest my arm. None of the actual threads are coming loose, nor is the surface separating from the foam underneath. I don't think that this will last quite as long as a good stitched edge, but it has not started to fall apart on me and it still feels pretty high quality. Then for the non-slip solution, instead of using a typical rubber backing, it actually uses this high density foam. You can see here that the pad is separated into 2 layers of the surface and then the foam underneath. On my own desk surface, this non-slip backing works very well and I don't notice it moving in game at all, but I can still pretty easily adjust it. I experience no issues with drift and I can only very slightly move it when I apply downward force. However, I do still think that this is going to be very desk dependent because the foam doesn't have any sort of texture on it. The only thing that creates friction is the actual compatibility between this foam layer and the surface of your desk. I'm sure that on some people's surfaces this won't work at all and will slide around a lot, so this non-slip backing doesn't feel very reliable to me. Since this foam layer is so dense as well, it also makes the pad pretty hard and unforgiving. There is still a tiny bit of give so it isn't completely solid, but I don't actually feel it adding any comfort, and on my hand it feels pretty unforgiving. The trade-off here though is that it does make the pad feel very consistent. You won't feel your hand, arm, or mouse sinking into the pad at all, and it'll feel like it has a very flat, very uniform glide. I would certainly prefer something with a little bit more squish to make it more comfortable, but this isn't too bad, because the actual surface itself does have a very pleasant arm feel. It uses very smooth, soft to the touch fabric. It feels very nice on my arm and causes no irritation issues even on the most sensitive areas of my hand. The surface has a really nice print, so it is also very easy on the eyes. My camera cannot do this pad justice, and it does look much better in person. The colors are very vibrant and the pad almost shines. When you're in a well-lit room, these bright colors end up reflecting a little bit of light off the surface and give the pad a very glistening and very shining quality to it. I think this is why a lot of people feel that the pad is coated. It does certainly give off that impression by how it reflects light and also how soft and smooth it feels on your skin. However, this pad is still completely uncoated and all these properties are just from the actual fibers used themselves. Because of this, it should also feel pretty durable. I personally have not used my copy enough to experience any durability issues, and have not heard anybody else report anything similar to how a pad like the GSR SE would wear down. It does seem like the actual surface performance of this pad will hold up over time. And also, just as an added bonus of the surface, it stays incredibly clean. It is impressive how little dust and lint sticks to the surface. You can wipe it completely clean instantly with no effort whatsoever. Combine the super clean look with this already very nice print, it makes the pad a nice aesthetic addition to your desk and offers you some nice eye candy. However, one issue that does arise from this reflective look is that it does feel a little bit sticky on my arm. Something is shiny like this and ends up almost feeling like a glossy mouse coating, where when you get sweaty you're going to start to notice a little bit of stick. I most notice it in the heel of my hand right here where I make the most contact while using my mouse. When I'm making very large, smooth swipes, I will sometimes notice a little bit of drag happening. This isn't bad and it doesn't affect my aim too much, but it is a little bit annoying. I think that in a very humid climate, you will start noticing a lot more of this sticking. And I feel that that will be a much bigger factor in determining how this pad holds up to weather conditions, than instead of the actual surface itself slowing down when it gets more humid in your room. It has been very cool and dry where I live since this pad was released, so I've not had the best conditions to test this for humidity, but whenever I did get sweat buildup on the surface, it didn't slow it down that much. It was very hard to notice and was only a slight change. The vast majority of your issues with humidity will come from arm stick. Alright, now onto what this pad actually feels like to use in-game. What defines this pad is that it's a very smooth, very controlled feeling glide. It has very premium feel to it and is very satisfying to use in game. This glide is quite nice. You get almost zero texture surface and feedback, but it is so smooth that I do think it makes up for that, and is still able to create a very satisfying glide. Small movements have a pretty high amount of resistance on this pad. It really feels like you're dragging your mouse against the surface and you have a very high amount of friction that allows it to feel very controlled in these small inner hand motions. If you want something that feels very locked in with a high amount of resistance on these correction type motions, then this pad will work out well for you. However, what prevents this pad from feeling slow is that it does pick up speed very quickly once you actually get your mouse moving. There is a very noticeable amount of static friction that you will have to overcome to get your mouse moving from a standstill, but once you are able to overcome this force and start making larger swipes, the amount of friction you feel will start to lessen, and the glide will start to feel much quicker and much snappier. This is my personal favorite thing about the surface. I feel so controlled in these inner hand correction motions, but the surface still allows me to breathe when I'm making these larger swipes to acquire targets or just look around the map. Then the glide feels so satisfying too that these large swipes also just feel good to make. So while this higher resistance on smaller motions and less resistance on larger motions may feel a little bit daunting and hard to learn at first, the actual transition that you feel between these motions feels very smooth and very linear. It doesn't feel like it picks up speed in any awkward way, and it feels like it just makes sense. It wasn't quite natural for me at first, and it did take me a little bit to get used to it, but now this feels very consistent and very uniform. You very quickly start to get a feel for how it picks up speed and how you can use it to your advantage, for when you want to have higher resistance and feel locked in versus a nice smooth, quick experience. In this regard, it feels a little bit better than the Saturn I reviewed earlier. On this pad, once you overcome the static friction, it feels like your mouse accelerates very quickly, and then the speed starts to taper off as you're making these more dynamic motions. I was never quite able to get used to this, and it still feels like the pad accelerates a little bit too quickly for me. But on the PA, in contrast, the moment you overcome the static friction, it very smoothly and very evenly ramps up to its faster speed. It feels more learnable and more consistent in this regard for me personally. The GameSense Radar is another pad that has a similar feeling of acceleration to the PA, but instead goes the opposite direction as the Saturn, where the acceleration starts off pretty slow, but then very quickly ramps up once you get these more dynamic motions. Then again, the PA has much smoother transition where I still feel it pick up speed, but it doesn't start accelerating very quickly at the back end. So this glide does have some fairly funky qualities, but it does feel very learnable and very consistent. This difference in resistance between static and dynamic movements also gives the pad a ton of stopping power. At the moment you start to slow your mouse down at the end of a flick, it comes to a very sharp, very stable stop. It definitely feels like this pad has a disproportionately high amount of stopping power for its speed. At the moment you want your mouse to stop, it feels like it just glues to the surface. And then after you stop, it also does have a very good feeling of stability as well. That noticeable amount of static friction keeps you locked in and eliminates any jitters that you may have at the end of large motions. This quick, smooth glide with a very high amount of stopping power feels great for single point precision aim. I feel that it can be so snappy and so precise when I'm making these quick and large motions. This pad often have very little need to microcorrect, and I feel that I can pretty frequently blind flick and still get good results. Of course, this will be less consistent than manually correcting your aim after you make these large motions, but if you do want to go for this very flashy, high-risk, high-reward playstyle, this pad does feel very good for it. Hitting these large, flashy flicks are definitely this pad's niche, and where it excels the most compared to other offerings.
18 now. Too old. Too old for Matt. Someone in the chat said, free Nestor until it's backwards.
However, this high amount of stopping power does not make this pad feel as good for tracking overall. I think that for smooth and precision tracking, this pad actually feels pretty solid. You have a good glide that picks up speed on larger motions, so when you're doing this large angle tracking, the pad is able to get out of your way and make these motions feel pretty easy to make. But then it still has a good amount of resistance to keep you locked in and drawing nice, straight, clean lines. Smoothly track and maximize damage in key situations, this pad feels pretty solid. But when I want to be more quick and reactive with my tracking, I really feel that this pad starts to let me down. It feels like it comes at such a stable stop that when I want to change direction, it ends up adding a little bit of delay. I'm not able to quickly switch between left and right directions because there's a pretty notable pause where I have to overcome the static friction. It is still pretty doable on reactive tracking for me, because once I do overcome that static friction, it picks up speed and I feel like I can very quickly acquire my target back again. But still, that pause I feel is super annoying and very distracting. It feels like I have to fight against the pad in reactive situations instead of just very smoothly, very naturally tracking. In these specific applications, I do think that you will be better served by a faster pad with less static friction. It is so much easier and so much more effortless to reactively aim on those surfaces.
Most of my union are more than an hour commute and we don't get offered the hotel room. For example, a good comparison here.
Where I do think this pad excels and really shines its brightest is in tack shooters. This decent amount of static friction and higher resistance on these small inner hand motions make you feel very locked in and adds a lot of stability to your play. Crosshair placement feels super solid across the board. Whenever I'm holding an angle or setting it for a peak, I feel super locked in. There's absolutely no unnecessary motion, and I feel like this pad ends up cleaning up my aim a lot. I feel super smooth and super efficient in my crosshair placement. This feeling of efficiency also translates to your correction type movements. I feel that whenever I need to adjust to hit a target, I feel very slow and very deliberate, and my first shot accuracy is generally improved. It feels like I'm dragging my mouse against the pad in these types of motions, which helps to slow me down, and make me make sure that the correction movements I'm making are correct and efficient. However, this feeling of slow deliberacy did turn me off a little bit. Since it feels like I'm dragging my mouse against the pad on these small motions, I end up fighting against the surface a little bit too much to be completely comfortable. Personally, I greatly prefer when a pad is a little bit faster on these small inner hand motions, because I feel that it makes my correction aim very effortless and I don't have to think about it as much. On this pad, I feel that I have to be much more conscious about how I'm actually moving my mouse to get good results in game. So while I am able to get very consistent, high-performing mechanics, I feel that it does distract me from other aspects of my game that are just as important. However, this will still of course be highly preferential if you are someone that likes a higher amount of resistance on these inner hand motions, then this could actually be the opposite and feel much more effortless for you. I would still recommend something that is a little bit faster on these types of motions because I do feel that it is higher performing overall on paper, so it is worth you attempting to learn it. Another thing that makes this pad especially good for tack shooters is that it has a lot of stopping power relative to its glide, as I talked about earlier. On this pad, it feels very good to quickly snap between angles and still find a good stable crosshair placement at the end of your flick. Large angle acquisition feels very solid and helps you keep up the pace when things get hectic, while still having a very controlled, locked-in feeling all at the same time. If you are a tac shooter player, I definitely think that this surface is worth checking out. It offers everything you want for that type of game while also still being fairly balanced. It's no mystery why the GSR SE was so widely used by pros. It is a very natural fit for these types of games. So overall, this pad is super solid. The pad is high quality and the surface performs well in a wide variety of applications. This is a great example of a very typical controlled cloth surface. I still don't think it's super universal though, because this high resistance on small movements will turn a lot of people off, myself included. Having something that feels more effortless in these motions will be more universal. But if you are someone who likes a very locked in, controlled feeling, then I think that this pad is a great option. Plus, it just looks incredible. Alright, thank you all for watching, see you in the next one.